Judy Robinett, and I'm a funding strategist and expert on building high-powered strategic networks. Today we're going to talk about how those kind of networks can propel you to growth with your company, find funding, or make your life more successful. So join Dove and myself, and we look forward to seeing you.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dove Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dove Barron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dove Barron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dove Barron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. I'm your host, Dove Barron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness so you can reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and of course, your leadership. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dove Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're taking an insider look at high-powered schmoozing, otherwise known as strategic networking, whether it's to find funding, top employees, or board members. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can find us on iTunes, on Spotify, and on iHeartRadio, as well as Tuner.fm, Stitcher, and all the usual outlets for podcasts. You can also tune in to us through terrestrial radio through a whole variety of different FM and AM stations, including 102.1 FM in Lancaster, Philadelphia. So a big shout out to all of our listeners right there. If you're a regular, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. With millions of downloads and plays, we're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. And remember, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get yourself over to iTunes, iHeart, and Spotify. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you are a CEO, someone in the C-suite, sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you probably know that in today's market, there are more resources than just about any time in modern history. But the question is, how do you get access to those resources? Well, stay tuned, because our guest today on this episode is Judy Robinett. Now, Judy Robinett is a business thought leader, and I know that term is thrown around, but this lady is really it. She has been profiled in The Street, Vogue, not as in your corner street, but The Street magazine, Vogue, CBS, NBC, Forbes, The Washington Post, Bloomberg, Businessweek, as a sterling example of a new breed of super connectors who use their experience and network to accelerate growth and hence profitability. She gives presentations worldwide on business strategy, high-end strategic networking to specific outcomes. She's got more than 30 years of experience as an entrepreneur, corporate leader, and she has served as CEO of both public and private companies in management positions at Fortune 500 companies. She is also the author of How to Be a Power Connector, now I'm never sure how to say this, 5-50-150 rule. I'm sure she'll clarify that up for me in a minute, which is number one of the top 10 business books of 2014 by Inc.com. Her second book, Crack the Funding Code, will be released in September of 2018, and she is a double TEDx speaker. So please put your hands together and welcome the quintessential movement and shaker. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Judy Robinett.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
It's good to have you here. It's a real pleasure. I know that you and I had this great conversation a few months back. There was so much great common ground, and there's so much of what you're doing that is so important to leaders today that I think the leaders just don't get. They don't really understand it. Now, I want to just start right at right at the beginning, how did you end up becoming this? I mean, like I said, you've been a CEO, you've been a leader in all kinds of ways, but you've become this, use my term, world-class schmoozer. Right?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
It really started by accident. I mean, as a kid, I'd been bullied. I was just extremely shy. But when I got into the corporate world, I noticed other people were getting promoted and I wasn't. And I finally figured it out. It wasn't that, they were smarter, they were working harder. It was who they knew. And there's this underpinning in the corporate world of the influential to those who are making decisions. And I figured I'd better learn how to do this. So I first read the book, How to Make Friends and Influence People. And I started saying hello. And I found out, geez, people actually like talking to me. And then it kind of became a little bit of a challenge for me to see if I could just talk to anyone anywhere. And, now, as you know, I do travel the world and have just been blessed with the kind of connections that I have. And the other secret is I learned that everybody's got problems and their problem is somebody else's solution. So, for instance, 2 weeks ago, I was at Pebble Beach on the 18th hole and met Vish, who is the founder of Angels. He was the first investor into PayPal. Right. And most people would say, he's got all the money in the world. He doesn't need to worry about anything. And I said, how could I help you? And he said, I'm putting on this conference in May on artificial intelligence. I need to find some top speakers. Well, I very quickly made 3 introductions for him. And so when you realize how to add value, and I did that. And now, of course, from doing that, I just have a wealth of connections, and I welcome people to reach out to me. And nothing I love better than a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you've been involved in a lot of this stuff. I mean, you are still part of investing, investor capital, where people are coming together looking for investors. I mean, you've been invested with up to companies that have raised $7.4 billion. You've done 145 strategic exits. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah. And finding funding is probably one of the more difficult resources to get your hands on.
Of course. Yeah.
And what people don't understand is everything's usually attached to a human. People know the best jobs. They know where the money is. They can tell you the best deals, all that kind of stuff. And when you get that, and I got that when I became the CEO of a small public biotech company that honestly should have never been public. They were broke. In litigation, and I said, sure, I'll help, and I raised $8 million. And then I was very sad. I go to the big bio conferences and give speeches on how to find money, and I would meet someone that arguably had a cure for some type of cancer, and just really saddened they could not figure out how to connect the dots to funding. So I decided I would figure out what that ecosystem looked like. So now I sit on the boards of VCs in Silicon Valley, New York, and I love to do that, but I can tell you, anyone will talk to you. Most people are happy to help. But research, of course, shows that we only talk to strangers 2% of the time, which is really sad.
Yeah,
because you need to make yourself available and show people you can add value. And you never know. I mean, some of this can be planned, but some of it is so serendipitous. Yeah. And if you'd like an example, I always try to help people and be generous. And there's a woman that's a partner at Hogan Lovells, one of the biggest law firms in the world in D.C., and she called me one day and said, Judy, I want you to go on this diplomatic mission with me to Serbia, and all expenses paid because you've been so gracious. And I thought, what on earth would I ever find in Belgrade?
Right.
I now have probably the best business partner of my entire life, who has a company called Easygoing. There'll be an end-to-end solution with blockchain, cryptocurrencies, already has 300 units deployed in Europe, and will be doing a very large ICO in Europe. And, a lot of my friends said to me, why on earth would you bother going to Serbia? And I always will try to say yes, realizing that if I just sit home, nothing will happen.
Right.
And if I make myself available, now this one, Kevin Harrington actually asked me to go meet this guy while I was in Belgrade and see if he had a good character and if his business model was okay. But that all happened because I helped a lawyer out of D.C.
So there's 2 things you brought up there that I think are very fascinating. One is the willingness to talk to strangers. I did a video on this last year where I talked about we're all conditioned with don't talk to strangers because because you're a kid and you could get kidnapped. But that tape runs in our heads, and we expect to make business. And like, well, if you don't talk to a stranger, how are you going to have business? How are you going to connect with people? So we have to do that. That's the first thing. You got to overcome that part of us that is resistant to that. But the other thing is that you said that I have lived by, but it's a double-edged sword. And that is always be willing to say yes. Be willing to say yes because you never know. I am naturally shy. Most people don't believe that about me, but I am naturally shy. But what has pushed me to get out there is what I say to myself is, I don't know if this is I might meet my new best friend at through this meeting. It might be my new best business partner, whatever it might be. But at the same time, the double edge of that is it can become shiny object syndrome. I'm invited to go here, I'm invited to go there, I'm invited to do this, and now I'm doing all these things, but they don't pay off. Help us to filter that, because you're masterful at this. Help us to work out, how do you know what to say yes to versus what to say no to?
So, you need to be really aware of what your goal is and begin with the end in mind, as Covey said, and other people have said it, Benjamin Disraeli. And so, if you're looking for funding, then where do the people who have funding hang out? How can you get in the right room? And particularly, how can you get in a room other people don't necessarily get into? And when you're able to do that, then you've met your goal. So number one should certainly be, you don't want to just blindly go out there and say yes to everybody in the world. You would be exhausted. And I did that when I was younger. I tried to solve the world's problem. And one day I thought, maybe I should fix my own. And
that's a concept.
That helps. But the second thing is to get in the right room. So, for instance, I was invited a couple of months ago to the Churchill Club. I'd never heard of them. They're in Silicon Valley. It's a highly curated group. I met the CEO of LinkedIn, the CEO of eBay, kind of the who's who. Now, there isn't anybody in that room that probably isn't somebody that could help me or that I could help. And there's Renaissance Weekend in every major city all around the globe is the Association of Corporate Growth. So I often meet people and they'll say, geez, I just need to really grow this segment for my company to get more money, to get more accounts. And I'll tell them to go to ACG because it's groups of like-minded individuals. They're C-suite level. They're across all different industries, and I guarantee if you go to one of these meetings, which they're happy to have people as visitors, you'll meet some people who can open the doors, whether it's business, an acquisition, whatever. And so you think about what is your goal, and then where do the people you need hang out? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes in funding, it's really hidden. Many people haven't heard of family offices, and they don't know that they're now doing 87% of them are now investing in startups. So you need to have the knowledge, do a little bit of background work on the ecosystem, whatever it is that you need. So be clear on what it is you need, and then who is it that might have that resource available to you, and then get in the right room. I often meet people who tried to find funding for years or tried to do something for years, and they've worked hard, going around the same, maze like a rat, and just one or two introductions away. And often, Dove, those people that could have helped them are already in their network. And so I tell people, make sure you share what your story is, where you're going, and then you ask what I call my two golden questions. What other ideas do you have for me? And number two, who else do you know that could help me, that you could introduce to me? And this is how I've been on panels with Mark Cuban and get invited to the White House. I mean, I told you before, I grew up in the same neighborhood where they filmed Napoleon Dynamite. Right. So I went to that high school, an absolute nobody. And I am blessed, but anybody can do it. I mean, literally anybody can do it.
Is there, when it comes to skills, is it those two questions, or is there something else that, because a lot of our listeners and our viewers they're high level, they are C-suite individuals. Many of them are high level entrepreneurs. And, I think that if you're in that category, growth is part of your nature. You're looking to unfortunately not often enough wanting to grow yourself, and that's a whole different category, but certainly grow your business and take it to the next level, whatever that means for those people. Does it come down to those two questions? What new ideas do you have for me, or who do you know who I should meet? Or is there something else that they need to bring forward that you think?
Well, the number one thing is identify the top thought leaders, influential people that they currently know who could have a better answer. I mean, here in the little community I live in, there's two of my neighbors that are truck drivers. Now, that's very different than if I call my friend who's the vice president of American Express and say, who else do you know? What other ideas do you have? And so you try to get the best people that you can on point for that, whatever the problem is.
Yeah.
And, everybody's full of opinions. But unless they've been there and done it, that's different. So, I try to help people get better reality to make sure that, because the most damning thing, and this, Dove, is what you don't know. And that's really the basis of asking those two questions. Now, just this morning, I called one of my friends and said, should we go after regional banks with this company? And he wrote back and said, no, go after the credit cards. Visa and Amex have 22,000 of those banks at their fingertips. Had no clue.
Right.
I wouldn't have even known the answer to ask.
Right.
But if you share what your problem, what your story, what your issue is, then you get just tremendous input.
But that, I think that's a really great point, because I think that, we talk about not knowing, you don't know what you don't know. But one of the things that in the work that I do with leaders is, and you've just pinned it there, is that sometimes you don't know what to ask. You don't know actually how to frame the question. So you're asking something and you're getting an answer and you go, it's not the solution. And it's actually not that they're giving you the wrong solution. It's that you're asking the wrong question. And so it's interesting. I talk about having a personal advisory board that you need a person. And one of the challenges is, I think, that we have a problem and we go ask people who have the same problem.
Yeah, right. You're absolutely right. I meet people all the time and they've joined these different networking groups and they go and they're surrounded by a bunch of other people who are broke or who are at the same level they are.
Right.
And it really is true. And I've heard this several times, think about the 5 people you run around with and what their net worth is. That's yours.
Absolutely.
And so, you have to get out of your comfort zone. And a lot of this is based on fear. I mean, part of the reason I was shy is I thought, what do I have to offer anybody?
Exactly.
What do I have to offer anybody? But you need to get out of your comfort zone, and you find out it doesn't matter how high you go. This morning I was on the phone with Kevin Harrington, another billionaire I was on the phone with later. We all have the same things. We love our family, we love our pets, we're concerned about our health, our money, our family. And those are things everybody can relate to.
Human things.
Yeah, human things. You want people that are going to care.
Yeah.
And I used to say I only let people in my network who had a good head, a good heart, and a good gut. And I boiled it down to, is this an Oprah or a Martha Stewart? Now, they're both billionaires, just superb at what they do.
Absolutely.
But if I had to have one that had my back, it would be Oprah.
Right.
So you pick people who would share your values. Research shows when you meet a stranger, the first thing you look for is warmth. You want to make sure they're not nuts, they're going to kill you. And the second is some level of confidence. and
you seem very nice, but that knife in your hand is really putting me off.
Yeah. But the third, I say, is make sure they have a level of generosity, because there's a lot of people out there that could help you, but won't.
Yeah.
And so values are an important thing. But if you just stretch yourself, talk to a couple of strangers a week, just ask a couple of questions, go to a different group. So what I find is usually, the accountants run around at all of the accountant confabs. And so they're really kind of stuck in their box. And about the time you need a new job or you decide to start a company and need funding, you're kind of, screwed, literally, because you don't have the right people to go to.
Yeah, as you know, and appropriately so, by the way, there's a lot of talk about diversity. And I think diversity is vitally important. But one of the things that I think is probably more important is cognitive diversity. And unfortunately, we tend to spend our time, like I was just saying, you're going through relationship problems and you go talk to your idiot friend who's gone through 7 marriages and you say, what should I do? You know, what are you doing? You're asking the wrong people. Go talk to somebody who's actually got a healthy relationship and has had one for a considerable amount of time and find out from them. That's a better idea. But that cognitive diversity is a powerful thing. I just heard Van Jones speak last night or the night before, and he said something fabulous. He says, you're interviewing people for a job. And he goes, 3 people show up and you put them through the test and there's 10 questions and 2 of them get 7 right and 1 of them gets 3 right. Who do you employ? And he said, most people will respond, the people who got the 2 7s. And he said, wrong. They can solve the same problems. But if the other person solved the 3 they didn't, you hire one of the 7s and 1 of the 3s. Because now you've got cognitive diversity, which allows for a greater expansion. And I think a lot of the time, and I understand it because it's part of how the brain works, and I understand the mind and psychology, we want to surround ourselves with people who are like us, believe what we believe. And I think that's why the greatest presidents have surrounded themselves with people who don't necessarily agree with them, who will challenge them and take it to that next level. So whether it's political, whether it's business or executive or whatever it is, my strategic advisory team, the people I surround myself with, there's some stuff we don't agree on at all. We have different philosophies, but as you were saying before, the value system, that's where the match is. What do we what really matters to us? And I think is that aligned with what you're saying?
Absolutely. And the other thing that I would say is get input from 3 to 5 people before you make a decision. Mm-hmm. And you are looking for a pattern. But inevitably, you'll learn things you could have never thought of.
Yes.
And that's what you want. You want to find the best information, the best knowledge. I've got a friend that became a multimillionaire by reading Proverbs. And he reads 2 verses a day for 30 days and then starts over. And someone that's a millionaire told him that's how he did it and learned. And, in there, he talks about knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and discretion. And he talks about avoiding the bad guys and being very careful and getting lots of advice from different advisors. And I look back, a lot of mistakes I made. I helped a guy raise $15 million, told me he would, get me this small fee back, and he never did. And I was stunned. I thought we had the same values. We didn't. But if I would have asked 2 of my friends, they both knew of him and knew of his history. Right. Bad on me, shame on me. So you really do need advisors. I'm going to be 65, and the older you get, the more you realize you don't know, you don't understand, and you start appreciating that cognitive diversity and input from other people that you would have never guessed. Yeah. And it makes you smarter and better make decisions, which makes you more successful in life.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of talk about when you get older, this happens or that happens. I just was 60 just last week, actually. And, I think that when I look around at people my age, I find that a lot of the ideas we have about getting older and wiser are not necessarily true. I think you get either older and wiser in the sense of you don't know, and you're willing to ask, or you get older and more rigid and say, I'm 60, so I should know, and I'm not going to ask anybody. And it's interesting because in this year, and I've always been a great sort of champion for asking for guidance and asking the right people. And this year, I've done more of it than I've ever done in my life. Surrounding myself with people and saying, listen, I don't know. Yeah. I think I know, but what if I don't? So help me out here. And it's fascinating. The smartest people I know are the ones who are willing to say, I don't know. Yeah. But I'm willing to find out.
Yeah. Aristotle had a great quote, and it was something like, better to read and get experience from people over their lifetime so you can learn, so you don't have to put your hand on the hot stove.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I love about millennials. One of the things I want to talk about millennials, but one of the things I love about millennials, and let's remember, these are not kids anymore. The eldest millennials are 38 years old, right? Mm-hmm. So But one of the things I love about them is they're willing to learn fast from other people's experiences. So we look at, when I say we, meaning my generation, look at them and go, oh, you've not paid your dues. No, you've not. What that meant in our world was I have to have 20 years of experience of doing stupid shit to find out what's the right thing to do. And a millennial says that lots of people have done stupid shit that doesn't work, so let me find out who's doing the right stuff and shortcut that whole thing. Oh my goodness, that's a smart thing to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, we've got a lot to learn from these folks.
The truth is we have a lot to learn from anybody. There's that famous poem, it doesn't matter whether they're rich or poor, they've all have their story, Desiderata. Yeah. And you can learn something from anyone. And, there's a big difference between hearing and listening. And so I tell people, just like we talk about reading between the lines, you can do the same thing with listening and learning. I'm a voracious reader, and I bet you are too. And haven't you watched an increase in the dollars, the opportunities that have come your way since you've formed this advisory board?
Of course.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And I say to people all the time, it doesn't have to be a fixed advisory board. It can be 5 people who are smart. It can be, a bunch of people, and never being afraid to say, listen, I don't know how to do this. I mean, you and I had a conversation when we first met. I said, I don't know how to do this. Do you know how to do this? You said yes. Like that, you've got to be willing to do that. This is vitally important. You and I talked about this because we met through Wendy Keller, who's been a guest on this show and who we both love, who's a wonderful person. And she has been, a force behind both of your books, How to Be a Power Connector and Cracking the Funding Code. And you had told me, you said you never intended to write a book, but there again, you never intended to do a TED Talk, and you ended up doing a couple of those. So,
yeah. And, Deutsche Bank called me and said, we want you to come do a second TED Talk in London and all expenses paid. And it sounded really good at first, but when you've done one TED Talk, you almost feel like you've shared everything, the best you could possibly share. And I struggled with it, but I knew it would be good for me to make myself do it. And so I did. And it's almost the same thing with the second book. And you've got to put yourself in those positions where you can be challenged and where you can learn and you can grow.
When you look at, you've got this wonderful history with incredible accolades. I believe that, I think you may know, I know that some of our listeners know, that back in 1990 I fell off a mountain, got smashed to pieces, fell equivalent of 12 stories, massive reconstructive surgeries, all kinds of things that happened out of that. But I've often said, and I do say from the stage, that we all have our falls. Mine was literal, because I'm a bit, nice guy, slow learner. But some people's fall is a divorce or a bankruptcy or the loss of a loved one or horrible diagnosis or whatever it might be. And I think that when I know from the interviews because I'm on other people's shows a lot, and people say, that must have changed your life. And the answer is it doesn't. It gives the opportunity for change, but it doesn't change us. It's later when things can return to normal.
Yeah. But you were certainly more open to learning, weren't you?
I actually think initially I was more rigid than before.
Okay.
Because I was trying to get back, and there is no back, there's only forward. So I was trying to get back. But once that broke down, when I collapsed on the floor and fell into a dark depression, that was when I opened up. So what was the turning point for you? Has there been a turning point for you? Was there a fall for you?
Oh my gosh. Really people, will often come up to me and say, you're so successful. And I'm like, really? Let me tell you some of the horror stories.
Right.
And it's kind of like Tony Robbins, next level, next devil. So, I was in the corporate world, vice president of a company, and I decided I'd read an article in the Wall Street Journal that, this is how you get financially successful. You be a doctor, a lawyer, inherit it, marry it. And I thought, well, those are out. Sure. And number 5 was start a business. So I thought, how hard could it be? And I got a $1.3 million SBA loan, and stupid me started a franchise restaurant. And I remember walking into a bankruptcy attorney with my, papers shaking, just deadly fearful. And he looked at him and he said, "You're not even close." And I said, I'm broke. And he said, Judy, let me tell you, they can break you, but they can't eat you. And that was one of the best pieces of advice, because I put, some steel up my spine and moved forward. And I turned that thing around and sold it. And when I think back, I think it's just so important that you realize very few things can kill you. And I realized what a terrible holdback being afraid was. Mm-hmm. If somebody says no, you just say next. There's 7.4 billion people on the planet. If somebody doesn't help, fine. You don't want them in your network anyway.
Right.
And so for me, it was just so important to deal with the fear. And every time I've had one of those, I almost call them Job moments. When I was younger, my dad and my cousin, who was a retired Southern Baptist preacher, were always talking about Job. And after my dad died, I said to my cousin, why? And he said something I'll never forget. Why me? Mm-hmm. But the reality is, 9 months later, supposedly, he had it all back plus more. And I found each one of those really did become a stepping stone. The almost failure of the restaurant catapulted me into becoming the CEO of a public company for about 9 years. It put me in a whole different ballgame than anything I'd ever done before. And it's hard, but you have to have faith in yourself and in the universe. Einstein, I think, said, your choice is it a good universe or is it a bad one?
Right.
A lot of things can be created by luck, by how you position yourself. But if you have the right attitudes, then it allows for this amazing, lucky situation, serendipity to happen.
Right. Do you, in my experience, the leaders I've, met a lot of phenomenal, amazing human beings. And in my experience, I know this word has a negative connotation, but I don't see it that way. The most successful people I've met, and by that I don't just mean financially successful, but the most successful people I've met are obsessed. They have some particular obsession that, if there's a movie they're watching, they see that in the movie. If there's a book about it, they see it. If there's a page in the book about it, that's the page they're talking about. If there's a conversation going on somewhere over in the room over there and they hear it, that's like their ears prick up and they've got to go. What's your obsession?
Oh my gosh. So I've done that all the time. I was in a Barnes & Noble listening to a couple of guys talk about their startup, and they were doing everything right. And then they started talking about raising money, and they had it all wrong. And I went over and said, and I pondered, I thought about this, should I bother them? And I thought, I can spend just a few minutes and make their life much better. Mm-hmm. And I went over and said, excuse me, I'm an investor. I know how this works. Can I give you some advice? And they said, sit down. And they took notes for 15 minutes. And so I understand how that works. I love a challenge. I love solving problems and probably creating. So when I see a very high potential startup, I love to jump in, because I've learned when there's chaos, you have total freedom to create. But I've got 2 horses in the backyard. I love to go to Yellowstone, and I've got a favorite grizzly bear with her cubs. When I was younger, I read that quote that said, most men go fishing all their lives without realizing it's not the fish they're after. And when I was younger, I thought, well, what could it be? And it's peace. Yeah, it's peace. We all at some point relish peace. So I love nature. I love learning.
So really. Would you say that learning is your obsession?
Learning and doing. Probably learning and executing.
So because that's where I actually wanted to go, because I meet a lot of people who are phenomenal executors, but they're terrible learners. They're doing stuff all the time, but they don't learn. They don't learn from their own mistakes, and they're not actually willing to learn about themselves or about what it is they're doing. I meet other people who are phenomenal learners, but that next step into the action is a difficult place for them. Can you, because you've done both with those 2 obsessions, give us some guidance either way.
So, I read somewhere that 70% of the books that are purchased are never read. And I think it's the same thing with motivational programs or whatever. For a while, it was like me trying to solve other people's problems. And then I thought, maybe I should solve my own. And I read this great little book, and I think it's Dan Kennedy, and he talks about if you and I were having this conversation 3 years from today, what would need to have happened personally and professionally for you to be happy? Mm-hmm. Particularly, what 3 opportunities do you need to jump on now? What 3 strengths do you need to leverage? And what 3 dangers do you need to avoid? And I have found that to be really helpful to get me focused on where I am today and what I need to be doing. And that can change, but if I think about that, because I can, like most people, I think, get pretty overwhelmed at everything and all the problems and the changes going on in the world. But if I focus on that, I have found that to be tremendously helpful, and to lay a groundwork that, exactly the places I'm going to move to in 5 years, what dangers do I need to mitigate, what opportunities right now do I need to seize, and what 3 strengths leverage.
When you look at people who are looking to get some venture capital, looking to explode their business, what do you think is the number one mistake people, let's say we've got a CEO here who, or even a C-suite individual or entrepreneur who is looking to start something new, they're doing those things. What's the number one mistake they make that you see? Because you get to see these people, and you get to see the ones who take off like a rocket and the ones who explode on the launch pad.
So probably the biggest mistake is people get all excited about their Kool-Aid. They'll show up at an angel group and look at my great widget, isn't it great? And not focusing on what the investor wants to know. And number one is, how do I get my money back? So you need to be able to talk about your exit and what those comparables are. And then the second thing to be viewed as a high potential startup is mitigating risk as viewed by the investor. I worked with Skull Candy. People were a little leery about Rick. He'd been in a couple of bankruptcies. And so we put a really pretty bow on the package. I told him to, get some credible board members, and that helped mitigate the risk. Mm-hmm. And, 3 years ago, we went public for just under $500 million. And so the thing is, you have to have the best story and put the best shine on the package, and then get in the right room and understand what that ecosystem. Everybody knows about venture capital. Few people know about the 3,000 family offices in the United States, the 72, I think it's like $1 trillion that's going to be going from one generation to the next. Yeah. So there's no lack of funding. That's the other one. People think, there isn't funding. There's $379 trillion in private global wealth. So there's no lack of money. So then it's understanding who's more likely to fund you. Is it the angels? Is it the venture? Is it, whoever? And getting some understanding of how that ecosystem works. I mean, I've met people. I met a guy in California. He called me. He'd raised $15 million from people to build a platform that would help business college students interact with actual businesses. And then he went to the universities, and they didn't have any money to pay him for this. Well, he very quickly figured out how to pivot, but the guy raised $15 million. Right. I mean, really, it turns out that it's about being, I used to say resilience or grit, but now it's scrappy. So you always think about, I've got A and B. How can I get C and D that I don't have to get to E? And there always is a way, because there's no lack of resources out there.
But just sort of stepping into the shoes of our listener, our viewer, they go, well, how do I work out whether I need to go to the angel investors or to this group or that group? How do they work out who is the right group?
So it depends. It depends on the stage. For instance, a lot of angel groups want the high-tech deals. Mm-hmm. But there's nationwide angel groups like Golden Seeds, that's done lots and lots of deals. They split their investments across consumer, tech, and healthcare. So you can do that research online. You can look online at the National Angel Capital Association, the National Venture Capital Association. You can read Pitch Book and see who invested in what kind of deals. Typically, it's broken into what stage the business is. If it's early stage, then that's a seed investment. If you've already got sizable revenues, it could be a Series A. Right. And, almost any banker an investment banker, angel group, a professor of entrepreneurism, somebody at your local chamber of commerce could help sort that out.
That's pretty cool. That's good news for people. Let's go back a little bit, because you are very often in the room with very high-powered individuals. I know we had a conversation about that, whether that is in the venture capital world, whether that is in entertainment, business. You are in the room with a lot of those people. How do I put this? I'll give you an example. Tim Ferriss, in his book around Titans, talked about that he's never met a billionaire who hadn't done psychedelics. And what I found most interesting about that was the willingness to explore beyond what they know. That billionaires don't look at things the way other people look at things, that they're willing to step into the unknown, to step into the things that maybe even are scary. Do you see that as a consistent trait? What do you see as some of the consistent traits of the people who make it to the billionaire class?
Well, Mark Burnett is a friend of mine, and he started out as a nanny in LA.
Yeah.
And he's scrappy. I mean, he's a persistent little, guy. And so I think it's more that I've not met a billionaire that's used drugs. I mean, I know high-end people that are very serious about Judaism, their faith.
Of course.
And never done that. But I will tell you, there is a streak of people that have Asperger's.
Right.
And it allows them to focus differently than the rest of us. But what I see more than anything is just that being scrappy. If something doesn't work, you just say next.
Yeah, so again, I want to bring it back to, because again, we're having worked with a lot of leaders. I meet leaders who are incredibly tenacious, incredibly resilient, incredibly, quote, scrappy, but haven't broken through. I mean, they made it to a level, but they haven't broken through to that next level. What do you think is, if that person was sitting in front of you and saying, Judy, I've worked my ass off for 30 years or 20 years or whatever it is. I've been knocked down. I've got up. I've always gotten up. I know I'm skilled. I know I'm talented. And I've met great people, but it's never quite broken through. What would be your guidance to that person? What would you say?
I'd probably spend some time talking to them and find out how they're positioning themselves, either with their LinkedIn profile, their bio, and see if they've really captured the essence of them. And I find that most people don't. Absolutely. Other people can see things about us that we don't. So I'll usually tell people, go talk to three to five of your friends and ask them, what are the three very best things about me? And people are usually stunned to find out you have a real gift here that you hadn't even thought of. So that would be part of it. And then the other part is I'd put them in a different room. I'd send them to the Churchill group or the Renaissance group, where people who are at the next level or above can help, because sometimes we just don't see it. We haven't seen it. So we don't know what that's like. And, I was dazzled the first time I met a millionaire, and I was dazzled the first time I met a billionaire. But I'd never seen it. I grew up in a community that, we never had people like that. No. And so getting out of your comfort zone really does help.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point you just made about being dazzled, and then, you're around billionaires now and there's no dazzle. Because I think it happens for all of us. The first time you meet a movie star, it's like, oh my goodness. And then the next time it's like, okay, yeah, they would. So there's a transition from the glitter to the humanity.
Yes.
And realizing, as my mother used to say, don't forget everybody's shit stinks. It's just a humanizing thing of just like, okay, so the bottom line is that. And it's interesting for me because a lot of it is through the work that I've done, but also through having had this show for 10 years, is I've met amazing human beings. And what I get to with them is they've got problems like the rest of us. And I think the ones I've met are incredibly generous, as you pointed out. But there's another piece here. And the other piece is this, is what I've learned from the best of the best is they're consistently growing.
Yes. Absolutely. Learning. They're almost always voracious learners.
Yeah.
And keeping on top of trends, that kind of stuff. I mean, when I did the restaurant and went for a loan, my family about passed out. And people would say to me, "Are you worried?" And I finally said, I am worried. I'm worried what color Mercedes I'll buy.
Great answer. But the other side of it is the side of the human side, which is I've met people who are incredibly successful at two levels, meaning so they might financially be at the same level, but one of them have really committed to the development of their growth as a human being. And the others are driven by bottom line numbers.
Yeah.
They're both like at this super level that is aspirational for most of us. Do you see that distinction? Do you see that there are certain ones who are like, they're on a journey that is their own human development, being a better human being, and not just as in being a better Christian or a better Jew, but a better person. And then the other side, which are about more money in the bank.
Yeah, well, there certainly are people out there that I have seen that I would say are greed driven. All it is for them is the money. And some of those people, have done the divorces and, they're sitting home alone. And so I think it really is important to be balanced. And at some point they figure that out. Maybe it's when they are home alone with nobody to share their life with. But, a lot of the people that I meet, they're driven because they like to create. They like to solve problems. I mean, that's really where the entrepreneurs, they see something and say, why not? And go after it. And then as they get wealth, like you've seen with Gates and Buffett and people, then they don't have any cares. And so then they're happy to allocate their money elsewhere. And it's kind of like Maslow's thing. Somebody said if you don't have enough food, all you think about is food, and you move up, and if you don't have sex, that's all you think about, sex. And then as you get further up, then you're able to really focus on growing as a human or making a difference in the world. Mm-hmm. And some people do that anyway. They've chosen to be a priest or whatever, and that's their focus. They have no interest in money at all. But, certainly different motivations.
So that's interesting. So is that... If you were advising on that, are you telling somebody to go after success and money, and then when you've got enough success and money, work on yourself?
No, I don't really believe in that because I know the heartache. I've seen people who've made lots and lots of money and suddenly are divorced and they've lost their kids and lost everything. I don't really focus on that. I would rather work with people that are like the Oprahs. That they know that it's okay to have more money because it brings more freedom, better medical care, better education, more whatever. But they're not just focused on it just for the bottom line. They're not like wrecking their health, wrecking their family, wrecking any community they're in because that's it. And they get labeled as users, greedy. And some people, they have a lot of people that tag along with them because they think they're going to get a piece of the pie.
Sure.
But that's generally my thought.
So the reason I ask you that is because you are around these high-powered individuals, and this is a leadership show. And so I would love to hear your input on what you see as the state of leadership as we record this, in 2018.
Okay, well, the government kind of makes me nauseous right now. And I think we'll see a backlash at the midterm elections because of that. And people have decided they're going to go vote. And I think people prefer integrity and truth-telling and that kind of stuff. So I think I don't like what's going on, particularly in the government now. Mm-hmm. I do like what's going on in America with the continued innovations. Last year I gave a speech at NASA and I said to them, did you ever imagine that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos would be launching rockets? I mean, we're just in a wonderful situation right now that the innovation and the creativity is, unparalleled.
Yeah. You've got Google, you've got Bezos, and you've got Musk, all involved in space travel and potential meteorite mining.
Yeah.
If you'd have said that to NASA, they'd have been like, yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. So all of that, I think, is just brilliant. It's unparalleled. And I think we're going to see more of that because more people are connected. The information's out there. You can take classes from MIT or Harvard. So the knowledge is out there. We're seeing freer flow of capital with all of these different alternative vehicles, whether it's a crowdfunding Reg A or now the ICO world and blockchain. What's going to happen in artificial intelligence is just beyond belief.
What would you say is the again, you've got your finger on the pulse. What would you say is the thing we got to look for? What do you think we got to pay attention to about the biggest changes that are coming?
Oh, it's AI. It's artificial intelligence. So I always watch for Reed every Sunday morning. And 2 weeks ago, we had Bill Gates talking about how the Japanese by 2030 want to be the AI leaders in the world, and what are we going to do about it, and how it takes massive amount of data and data sets. And there isn't anything you can touch now that doesn't have some embedded chip something.
Yeah.
But I judged pitch events in New York for LTV, Evan Nelson's venture group and his conference. And I listened to a doctor from MIT say how she figured out you could take a picture on your cell phone of your kid's pimples and send it, and the computer could predict 98% which medication you needed. And then I heard another guy up talking about radiologists and how only 47% of them are accurate. And it's unparalleled stuff. I mean, it isn't just, we're not going to be driving cars. It's going to major impacts in medicine, in finance, the blockchain, all of this stuff, I think is just really amazing.
It really is. So as we come to the end of the show, I want to ask you, if there was one piece of advice that you could give to our listeners, whatever level they're at, whatever it is they're doing, that is a practical piece of guidance that you would want them to put into action in the next, preferably 24 hours, but let's say 5 working days, what would that direction be, Judy? Because, obviously you're a wealth of wisdom.
So, well, thank you. I would have them subscribe to Quartz online. It's a daily little newsletter I get that has all the trends, everything that's going on. I found that really helpful for getting curated information. I would ask them to go to a group that is like the Association of Corporate Growth or some private meeting like that. And I would ask them to write down who their top 25 people are in their network and reach out to those people and share what direction they're going to be happy, personally and professionally, in the next 5 years, and ask what other ideas do you have and who else I should talk to. And if any of them, if any people are having a problem figuring that out, send me an email. I'm happy to help you.
That's fabulous.
There's no lack of groups, private groups. In New York, they used to call them the Jeffersonian dinners. Dory Clark, you can Google Dory. She often writes for the Harvard Business Review. She has dinners at the Harvard Club, her alumni, and will bring in 20 people from different backgrounds, and they'll just have a wonderful time. Evan Nelson, he does the same thing with about 50 people once a month, entrepreneurs, funders. So these groups are out there, they're everywhere. Yeah. And do talk to strangers.
Yeah, go on.
Truly talk to strangers.
Yeah. And Dory's stuff is wonderful. Dory's been a guest on our show. She's a wonderful, wonderful lady and a powerful resource. And, like yourself, this is one of the things that I've found is that people at that level are generous. But because of that, the glitter mentality, it's like, these people won't talk to me. And I always say, if you show up with a specific question and you want help, they don't want to waste their time. But if you have a specific question, most oftentimes the person will happily say, sure, let me help you.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Well, I want to thank you for being with us. It's been awesome. It's been really
And I'll send you a list of 2 or 3 of the books that I mentioned, and you can include that.
Fabulous. That would be fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for being with us, Judy. It was a real pleasure. It was an honor. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy lady, and I know that you're in demand, so thank you for taking that time. And I really want to encourage you, dear listener, viewer, to make sure that you follow up with Judy. Judy, is there some way that they can get a hold of you or tap into the resources that you offer?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at Judy Robinett. My email is judy@judyrobinett.com, and there's no E on the end of Robinett. And happy to respond. People write to me all the time.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. Hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, I want to just remind you to please don't just listen to the show. Do something with it. Put it in action. Information is worth the hole in the donut. Transformation comes from application. And remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing the most successful companies is somewhat counterintuitive in that these fast-growing companies often hit a point where they're realizing they're spending a fortune training, developing talent, to have them leave them at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in training talent, only to have them leave you before you get your ROI, then come and talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside your organization. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. Also, remember to get yourself over to the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W, just matrix.fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. Will allow you to assess into 5 areas where your great strengths are and where you need to bring up your game and how we can help you with that. It's completely free. Go get it for yourself. Again, I'm your host, Dov Barron, founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you in tapping into your deep greatness so that you can reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership. Till next time, this is Dov Barron saying, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about who that next stranger is who might transform your life. Till next time, I am out.